The worst moment of my life didn't happen when I found my son sitting on the hardwood floor of his own high-rise apartment, shaking like a man who had just crawled out of a multi-car pileup. It didn't even happen during the long, agonizing silence that followed. It happened exactly 10 seconds before that, when his oldest friend, Caleb, grabbed my arm in the dim hallway of the 22nd floor and whispered, in a voice so brittle it sounded like it might snap, "Before you open that door, Elias, there's something you need to know about her. She's not who we thought she was. None of it was real." I was 65 years old that morning. I had buried my wife, Clara, 3 years prior after 40 years of a marriage that felt like a long, warm conversation. I had survived triple bypass surgery, a corporate downsizing at 59 that nearly wiped out my pension, and that particular, hollow brand of loneliness that settles into your bones when your children grow up and realize they don't need you to steady the ladder anymore. I thought I had seen the worst of what the world could throw at a man. I thought I had reached the age where surprises were just minor inconveniences. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. To understand how we ended up in that hallway in Philadelphia, you have to go back 18 months. You have to go back to a crisp Sunday afternoon in October, when my son, Julian, first brought Sloan Vance home to meet me. Julian was 32 then, a lead electrical engineer with a mind like a clock, precise, steady, and fundamentally honest. He had moved to Philly for a major project, about 2 hours from the stone farmhouse in Bucks County where I'd raised him. We had a good rhythm back then, phone calls every Sunday, fly fishing trips in the spring, and a mutual respect that didn't need many words. He was the kind of man who looked you in the eye, the kind of man who believed that if you did the work and treated people right, the world would return the favor. He called me on a Tuesday night, which was our first red flag, though I didn't see it then. He sounded breathless, like he'd been running. He told me he'd met someone, not just someone, but the someone. He said she was brilliant, a top-tier pharmaceutical executive who had just moved up from Savannah. He wanted my blessing before things went any further because, as he put it, "Dad, you're the only one who really knows what a soulmate looks like." I remember standing in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, looking out at the vegetable garden Clara had loved so much. I felt a surge of warmth I hadn't felt since the funeral. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted the Sterling name to carry on with the same integrity I'd tried to live by. When they pulled into the driveway that Sunday, they weren't in Julian's sensible sedan. They were in a white Range Rover with temporary tags and a leather interior that smelled like money and filtered air. Sloan Vance stepped out of the car, and for a moment, the air seemed to go still. She was stunning in a way that felt curated, dark hair pulled back into a perfect knot, eyes the color of expensive bourbon, and a smile that hit you like a physical force. She was 33, possessed an old money poise that felt both welcoming and slightly intimidating, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. During dinner, she was a masterclass in charm. She asked about my years as a civil engineer, nodding with genuine interest as I talked about bridge stress points and urban planning. She spoke fondly of her upbringing in Georgia, mentioning a family estate and a father who had been a high-ranking judge. She was polished, articulate, and seemed utterly devoted to Julian. Every time he spoke, she leaned in, her hand resting lightly on his forearm, her eyes never leaving his face. I told myself I liked her. I really did. But there was this tiny, nagging vibration in the back of my mind, the same feeling I used to get when a blueprint looked perfect on paper but felt structurally unsound in my gut. It was the way her smile never quite reached the corners of those bourbon eyes. It was the way she seemed to be performing the role of the perfect daughter-in-law, rather than just being it. But I dismissed it. I told myself I was just a protective old man who wasn't ready to share his son. "She's spectacular, Jules," I told him after she'd gone to the car to take a quick work call. Julian beamed. "She's the one, Dad." I've never felt so seen by another human being. I didn't know it yet, but being seen by Sloan Vance was the most dangerous thing that could happen to a man like my son. They were engaged within 6 months. It was a whirlwind expensive galas, weekend trips to the Hamptons, and a social circle that suddenly shifted from Julian's engineering buddies to Sloan's inner circle of high-powered consultants and investors. I saw Julian less and less. When we did talk, he sounded exhausted, but he'd always laugh it off, saying Sloan had a high-octane lifestyle, and he was just trying to keep up. The wedding was held at a private estate in Newport. It was a sea of linen suits, vintage champagne, and people who looked like they'd been born on yachts. My sister, Lydia, a woman who spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor and can smell a lie from 3 states away, sat next to me during the ceremony. She watched Sloane glide down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my first house. As the I-do's were exchanged, Lydia leaned over and whispered, "Elias, look at her hands." "What about them?" I asked. "She's not nervous," Lydia said, her voice flat. "Most brides have a tremor, a flush, something. She's as cool as a shark in deep water. She's not getting married, Elias. She's closing a deal." I told Lydia she was being cynical. I told her the law had made her see ghosts where there were only shadows. But that night, as I watched Julian dance with his new wife, I noticed he looked thinner. His suit, custom-tailored for the occasion, seemed a little loose around the shoulders. And when Sloane whispered something in his ear, he didn't laugh. He just nodded, his face tightening into an expression of focused obedience. The first year of their marriage was a blur of silence from their end. I'd call, and Sloane would answer, telling me Julian was in a meeting, or at the gym, or sleeping off a long flight. She was always polite, always sweet, but she was a fortress. She was the gatekeeper. In February, 8 months into the marriage, I drove down to Philly, unannounced. I told myself I was just in the neighborhood for a tool show, but the truth was, I hadn't heard my son's voice in 3 weeks. When I got to their penthouse, Julian looked like a ghost of himself. The light in his eyes, that steady, engineering spark, was dim. The apartment was filled with modern art and furniture that looked too expensive to actually sit on. Sloane was away on business in Savannah, and for the 2 hours we sat together, Julian barely spoke. He kept checking his phone. Every time it buzzed, he'd jump, his eyes darting to the screen with a look that wasn't love, it was fear. "Everything okay, Jules?" I asked. "Just work, Dad," he said, his voice reaching for a normalcy it couldn't quite grasp. "Sloane's helping me manage some investments. We're building a future. It's just a lot of pressure." I left that day with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't untie. A month later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Caleb, the best man from the wedding. He sounded panicked. He told me he'd tried to grab lunch with Julian, but Julian had canceled at the last minute, claiming he wasn't allowed to see anyone outside the circle right now. "What do you mean, not allowed?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Elias, I think she's draining him," Caleb said. "Not just the money. I think she's breaking him down on purpose. I saw his bank statements by accident when we were working on a side project last year. There were transfers. Massive ones. To accounts in Georgia. Accounts Julian didn't even know he had. I didn't wait. I didn't call. I didn't even pack a bag. I got into my truck and drove. I drove through a torrential downpour, my mind racing through every interaction I'd had with Sloane Vance, every prestigious story she'd told, every old money smile she'd flashed. When I reached the building in Philly, the doorman who usually greeted me with a nod looked away. I took the elevator up, my heart feeling like a trapped bird. That's when I saw Caleb in the hallway. That's when he grabbed my arm. That's when he told me she wasn't who we thought she was. "What did she do, Caleb?" I hissed, my voice shaking. "Where is she?" "She's gone, Elias," Caleb whispered. "She cleared the primary accounts this morning, but that's not the worst part. Go inside. Just be gentle with him." I pushed past him and opened the door. The apartment was stripped. The art was gone. The expensive furniture was gone. It was just a hollow shell of glass and steel. And there, in the center of the living room, sat my son. He didn't look up when I walked in. He was staring at a stack of legal documents spread out on the floor like a deck of cards. His hands were raw, the fingernails bitten down to the quick. "Julian?" I whispered. He looked up then, and the expression on his face will haunt me until the day I joined Clara in the ground. It was the face of a man who had realized that every "I love you," every shared dream, and every touch for the last 18 months had been a calculated move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. "Dad," he croaked, his voice breaking. "She didn't just take the money. She put everything in my name. The debt. The offshore transfers. The fraud. She didn't marry me, Dad. She framed me." I felt the room tilt. My son, the man who couldn't even lie about an expense report, was standing in the center of a financial crime scene crafted by the woman he worshipped. And then, his phone buzzed on the floor. A single text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. I looked down and read it. "Thanks for the signature, Julian. The sterling name finally carries some real value. Don't bother looking for me. I was never really there." I looked at my son, then at the empty, echoing apartment, and I felt a cold, hard resolve settle over me. Sloan Vance thought she had played a simple engineer and his aging father. She thought she could disappear into the shadows of the South with our legacy in her pocket. What she didn't know was that a civil engineer spends his entire life learning how to tear things down just as well as he builds them. And I was about to find the structural flaw in Sloan Vance's perfect life, no matter how many bridges I had to burn to get there. I stayed on the floor with Julian for hours. The sun went down, casting long, skeletal shadows across the empty living room. And still, he didn't move. He just stared at that stack of papers, the blueprints of his own destruction. As a civil engineer, I've spent my life studying how structures fail. Usually, it's something small. A microscopic crack in a load-bearing beam, a slight shift in the soil, a bolt that wasn't tightened to specifications. You don't see the collapse coming until the moment the weight becomes too much to bear. Looking at my son, I realized that Sloan Vance hadn't just been his wife. She had been a master architect of a different kind. She had spent 18 months quietly removing every support beam in his life until there was nothing left but the rubble. I finally managed to get him to the kitchen island, the only piece of furniture she'd left behind, likely because it was bolted to the floor. I made him tea he didn't drink and sat across from him, looking at the man I had raised. This was the boy who used to take apart his Lego sets just to see if he could build them back faster. He was a man of logic, of math, of if-then statements, and that was exactly what she had used against him. She told me we were investing in a legacy. "Dad," Julian whispered, his voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. She said the Sterling name deserved to be more than just a line in a payroll ledger. She talked about generational wealth. She made me feel like I was thinking too small. As he spoke, my mind drifted back to that first Thanksgiving they spent at the farmhouse in Bucks County. Sloan had arrived with a trunk full of expensive wine and a story for every occasion. She spoke about her father, the Honorable Judge Harrison Vance, a man of immense influence in Savannah. She painted a picture of a life filled with debutante balls, private schools, and a family tree that stretched back to the founding of the South. She made Julian feel like he was being invited into a secret, prestigious world. I remember watching her that day, the way she effortlessly navigated the conversation, making me feel like the most interesting man in the room, while simultaneously making Julian feel like he was finally becoming the man he was meant to be. I didn't know it then, but every story she told was a thread in a web. I didn't know that Judge Harrison Vance didn't exist, at least not in the way she described him. What I know now is that she was a predator who hunted in the tall grass of old money prestige. The wedding was the turning point, wasn't it? I asked quietly. Julian nodded, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. She insisted on Newport. She said her family's reputation demanded it. I told her I couldn't afford a quarter of that. She told me not to worry, that her trust would cover the difference, but that for tax purposes, the contracts had to be in my name. She said it was a show of faith in our marriage. A show of faith. I signed everything, Dad. Every vendor, every rental, every deposit. I thought I was being a partner. I was actually just being a shield. That was the brilliance of her cruelty. She hadn't just stolen his money. She had used his own sense of honor to bind him to her debts. She knew Julian. She knew he would never walk away from a signature. She knew he would spend his last dime before he'd let a bill go unpaid. She had studied his virtues and turned them into his greatest vulnerabilities. During that first year of marriage, the shifts were subtle. It started with the financial consolidation. Sloan had approached Julian with a spreadsheet. Engineers love spreadsheets, showing how much they could save by merging their assets into a private wealth management account. She suggested they use a firm her family had used for generations in Georgia. Julian, busy with a massive bridge project in Delaware and trusting his executive wife's financial acumen, signed the papers. "I remember the first time I noticed a discrepancy," Julian said, rubbing his eyes. "It was only $3,000. A transfer to a holding company I didn't recognize. When I asked her about it, she didn't get angry. She didn't even get defensive. She just looked at me with this pitying expression. She said, 'Julian, darling, if we're going to play in the big leagues, you have to stop thinking like a salaried employee. That was a seed investment. Do you not trust me?' That was her favorite weapon, the trust card. Every time Julian's logical brain flagged an inconsistency, she would turn it into a moral failing on his part. She gaslit him until he began to doubt his own eyes. He told me about nights when he'd stay up late looking at their digital statements, only to have her come into the office, rub his shoulders, and tell him he was overworking and becoming paranoid. She convinced him that the stress of his job was making him hallucinate financial problems that didn't exist. "I started to think I was going crazy, Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "I actually went to see a therapist because I thought I was developing some kind of obsessive-compulsive disorder regarding our money. Sloan even recommended the doctor, a family friend. I realize now that doctor was probably on her payroll too. Every session was about letting go of control and trusting my partner. The isolation had been just as surgical. Slowly, Julian's old friends, men like Caleb, were pushed to the periphery. Sloan would make small, disparaging comments about them. She'd say Caleb was stagnant, or that my sister Lydia was judgmental and stuck in her ways. She created a vacuum around Julian, and then she filled it entirely with herself. By the time I visited them in February, Julian was living in a world where Sloan Vance was the only source of truth. I looked at the documents on the island. Among the bank notices and final demand letters was a small embossed folder from a law firm in Atlanta. I opened it. Inside wasn't a wealth management agreement. It was a series of power of attorney forms, all signed by Julian, granting Sloan unrestricted access to not only his current accounts, but also the small inheritance Clara had left him, the money intended for his future children's education. My blood turned to ice. "Julian, did you know you signed these?" He leaned over, squinting at the signatures. I remember signing some papers for the trust transition. She said they were standard. It was the night before we left for our anniversary trip to St. Bart's. We'd had a bottle of wine. I was happy. I was relaxed. I didn't even read the fine print. I just wanted to make her smile. The level of calculation was staggering. She had waited for his moments of peak vulnerability, his joy, his exhaustion, his love to slide the noose around his neck. But as I flipped through the back of the folder, I saw something that didn't fit the Sloan Vance narrative. It was a copy of a birth certificate used for a passport application buried in the back of the file. The name on the certificate wasn't Sloan Vance. It was Sarah Jenkins, born in a small industrial town in Ohio, not 5 miles from where I had gone to college. I felt a jolt of adrenaline. The Savannah Belle, the judge's daughter, the old money heiress, it was all a character. She wasn't an elite predator from the South. She was a local grifter who had reinvented herself with a fake accent and a stolen history. And she had chosen Julian because he was the perfect mark. A man with a clean record, a high salary, and a heart too big for his own good. "Julian," I said, my voice hard now, "look at this." I slid the birth certificate across the marble. He looked at it for a long time, the silence in the room growing heavy. I watched the realization wash over him, the final, brutal confirmation that the woman he had slept next to for over 500 nights didn't even exist. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stood up, walked to the window overlooking the Philadelphia skyline, and stood there for a long time. When he turned back around, the broken, shaking man I had found on the floor was gone. In his place was something else, something colder. "She thought I was just a builder, Dad," Julian said, his voice flat and dangerous. "She thought I only knew how to follow the plans, but she forgot one thing about engineers." "What's that, son?" "We know exactly where the pressure points are, and we know that if you remove the right stone, the whole damn mountain comes down." He walked over to a small, unassuming floorboard near the radiator, the one place in the apartment Sloan hadn't touched. He knelt down and pried it up. I watched, breathless, as he pulled out a weathered leather notebook. "What is that?" I asked. "My paranoid habit," Julian said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Every time she told me I was crazy, I wrote down the transaction. Every time she gave me an explanation that didn't add up, I logged the time, the date, and the IP address of the login. She thought she was gaslighting me, but I was building a bridge of evidence. I just didn't have the heart to cross it until now." He opened the notebook, and I saw pages and pages of meticulous notes, screenshots, and account numbers. But then, his face went pale as he reached the final entry. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. "The last transfer," Julian whispered. "It didn't go to Georgia. It didn't go to an offshore account. It went to a private estate holding company in Bucks County. Dad, it went to a property less than 10 miles from your house." I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding in the South. She was in my backyard. But before I could say a word, the heavy front door of the apartment, which I had forgotten to lock, creaked open. I spun around, expecting Caleb, or perhaps the police. Instead, a man I had never seen before stood in the entryway. He was tall, dressed in a sharp, gray suit that screamed, "Lawyer," and he was holding a manila envelope. He didn't look like he was there to help. He looked like he was there to finish the job. "Mr. Sterling?" the man asked, his eyes moving between me and Julian. "I'm representing the interests of the Vance estate. I'm afraid I have some very unfortunate news regarding your father's property in Bucks County. It seems there's been a significant change in the deed's ownership." I looked at Julian, then at the man. My heart stopped. Sloane hadn't just taken Julian's future. She was coming for my past. The man in the gray suit didn't step into the room so much as he occupied it, his presence like a cold draft blowing through a broken window. He had a face like a sharpened hatchet, all hard angles and skin that looked like it had never seen a day of actual sunlight. He held a manila envelope with the kind of reverence a priest might give a prayer book, but the look in his eyes was pure predator. "My name is Silas Thorne," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "I represent the Vance Family Trust, specifically the interests of Sarah Vance, formerly known to you as Sloane. I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding the collateral for the private loans, Mr. Julian Sterling took out over the last 18 months. I felt the air leave my lungs. Collateral? My son didn't take out any loans. He had a 6-figure salary and a clean record. Thorne didn't even blink. He reached into the envelope and pulled out a document, sliding it onto the kitchen island next to Julian's tea. "On the contrary, Mr. Sterling. Over the course of the last year, Julian signed 3 separate promissory notes, totaling nearly $400,000. These weren't for investments. They were bridge loans to cover the operational costs of a pharmaceutical startup that, unfortunately, failed to launch. And since Julian lacked the liquid assets to secure such a sum, a guarantor was required." He flipped to the last page of the document. There, at the bottom, was a signature. Alias Sterling. My signature. The loops of the E, the way the S trailed off it, was perfect. It was mine. But I had never seen this paper in my life. Then, a memory hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. 6 months ago, I'd had a minor heart procedure, a follow-up to my bypass. I was in the hospital, groggy on morphine and post-operative haze. Sloane had been there, the dutiful daughter-in-law, bringing me homemade soup and a stack of pension protection forms. She told me the hospital needed me to sign off on some insurance waivers, so Julian wouldn't be stuck with the bill if something went wrong. I had trusted her. I had taken the pen from her manicured hand and signed exactly where she pointed, my eyes barely able to focus on the fine print. I thought I was protecting my son. I was actually handing her the keys to my life. "This is a forgery of intent," I croaked, my voice sounding like gravel. "I was under medical sedation." She lied about what this was. "A difficult claim to prove in a civil court, Mr. Sterling," Thorne said, and I could see the faint shadow of a smile, a cruel, thin thing. "The document is notarized by a notary who, I assure you, will testify that you were of sound mind and body. As of 48 hours ago, the Vance Family Trust has initiated a foreclosure on the property in Bucks County to satisfy the debt. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Julian made a sound, then a low, guttural animal noise. He lunged across the island, his hands reaching for Thorne's throat, but I caught him. I held my son with a strength I didn't know I still had, pulling him back as he shook with a rage that looked like it might shatter his bones. "Don't," I hissed into his ear. "That's exactly what they want. They want a police report. They want you in a cell so you can't fight back." Thorne didn't even flinch. He just adjusted his tie. "Wise counsel, Elias. You have 30 days. I suggest you spend them packing rather than litigating. You can't afford a lawyer who can beat me, and by the time you find one who will try, the house will already be on the auction block." He turned on his heel and walked out, the click of his expensive shoes echoing in the hollow apartment. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Julian collapsed back onto the floor, his head in his hands. The weight of it was finally crushing him, the realization that his love hadn't just ruined him. It had reached back in time and dismantled everything his mother and I had built over 40 years. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, the sound tearing through me. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she was capable of this." I sat down next to him, my back against the cold kitchen cabinets. I thought of the farmhouse. I thought of the height marks we'd carved into the pantry doorframe as Julian grew. I thought of the rose bushes Clara had planted the year before she died, the ones I spent every Saturday pruning, because it was the only way I knew how to keep talking to her. Sloane or Sarah, or whoever that demon was, didn't just want money. She wanted to erase us. "Listen to me, Julian," I said, my voice dropping into the tone I used when a bridge project was failing and every second counted. "We are not going to lose that house, and we are not going to let her walk away." "How?" Julian looked up, his face tear-stained and gaunt. "She's gone, Dad. She's got Thorn. She's got the law on her side because we were too stupid to see her coming." "We weren't stupid," I said firmly. "We were decent. There's a difference, and she's not as smart as she thinks she is. No one is." I reached for the leather notebook Julian had pulled from the floorboards. "You said you logged everything. Every paranoid thought, every IP address. Show me." For the next 5 hours, we didn't sleep. We didn't eat. We turned the empty kitchen into a war room. Julian, with the obsessive focus of an engineer who had finally found the flaw in the machine, began to walk me through the digital breadcrumbs Sarah had left behind. She had been careful, unbelievably careful. She used VPNs to mask her location, encrypted messaging apps to talk to her family in the South, and a web of shell companies that made a spider's web look like a straight line. But as we dug deeper into the logs Julian had kept, a pattern began to emerge. "Look at this," Julian said, pointing to a series of logins from 3 months ago. Every Tuesday at 11 p.m., she would log into a secure server based out of a small town in Georgia called Waycross. But look at the data usage. It's huge. She wasn't just checking bank balances. She was uploading files, engineering files. I frowned. "What kind of files?" "My project files, Dad. The blueprints for the Delaware River Bridge expansion, the stress test simulations, the proprietary alloy specifications we developed at the firm." My heart went cold. The Delaware project wasn't just a bridge. It was a multi-billion-dollar state contract involving new, experimental technology designed to withstand seismic shifts. It was highly classified information. "She wasn't just stealing our money," I whispered. "She was corporate spying. She married you to get access to your firm's server." "And that man in Atlanta," Julian added, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his laptop. "The one the accountant mentioned, Harrison Vance. I found a link. He's not a judge. He's the CEO of a rival construction conglomerate that lost the bid for the Delaware project. He's been trying to get his hands on our tech for years. The family trust wasn't a family at all. It was a payoff. Sarah Jenkins had been a mercenary, hired to infiltrate my son's life, strip him of his emotional stability, and steal the intellectual property that would worth tens of millions on the black market. The loans Julian had signed weren't just to drain us, they were her insurance policy. If Julian ever figured out what she was doing, she would use the debt to bury him so deep he'd never be able to testify against her. But there was one thing she hadn't accounted for. "Julian," I said, looking at the notebook, "you said the last transfer went to a property in Bucks County. Not a bank, but a holding company for a house." "Yeah, Ivy Ridge Estates. It's a shell company registered to Silas Thorne's law firm." I knew Ivy Ridge. It was an old, secluded mansion, about 8 miles from my house. It had been sitting empty for years, tied up in probate. It was the kind of place where someone could disappear, or the kind of place where a woman who thought she had already won might go to celebrate. I didn't know it yet, but that property was the key, I told Julian. "She thinks she's untouchable because she's hidden behind Thorne and a mountain of legal paperwork. But she's playing a game of paper, and we're going to play a game of reality." I stood up, my joints popping. "I'm going back to the farmhouse. I need to check something in your mother's old files." "Dad, what are you looking for?" "Clara never threw anything away, Julian. Especially not the records from when your grandfather sold that parcel of land to the county back in the 70s. If Ivy Ridge is where I think it is, there's a structural secret about that land that isn't on any modern map." I saw a spark of hope in Julian's eyes, the first since this nightmare began. "What happened next changed everything," I muttered to myself as I grabbed my keys. I drove through the night, the rain turning to a thick, gray mist that clung to the trees of Bucks County. As I pulled into the driveway of the farmhouse, the sight of the foreclosure notice taped to the front door hit me like a slap. I ripped it off, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it into the mud. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old paper. I went straight to the basement, to the heavy oak filing cabinet Clara had kept with meticulous care. I searched through folders labeled taxes, insurance, medical. Finally, I found it. Property deeds, historical. I pulled out a yellowed topographical map from 1954. My father had been a land surveyor before I became an engineer. He had mapped this entire valley. I traced the line of our property with my finger, moving past the creek, past the old mill, and straight to the border of the Ivy Ridge estate. And there it was, a handwritten note in my father's precise script. Caution, limestone shelf extension, subsurface drainage corridor, non-buildable without heavy reinforcement, natural easement. In the 70s, the county had granted our family a permanent subsurface easement for a drainage pipe that ran directly under the Ivy Ridge property to prevent our lower fields from flooding. It was an old-world legal agreement, one that modern developers often overlooked in their rush to flip titles. If that easement was still active, and if I hadn't signed it away in that hospital bed, it meant I had the legal right to access the Ivy Ridge property at any time for maintenance. It also meant that any structure built on that limestone shelf without my family's permission was technically in violation of a century-old land grant. I was looking at the map when I heard it, a car door slamming and heard in the driveway. I froze. It was 3 a.m. No one should be out there. I moved to the small basement window, peering through the dirt-streaked glass. A black SUV was idling near my porch. A man got out, not Silas Thorne. This man was larger, wearing a tactical jacket and carrying a heavy-duty flashlight. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like the kind of person you hire when the lawyers aren't enough. He walked up to my front door and tried the handle. Then, he looked directly at the basement window. I realized then that Sarah wasn't just waiting for the 30 days to be up. She knew Julian had that notebook. She knew we were digging, and she wasn't going to let us finish. I didn't know it yet, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs, but the hunt had already begun. I reached for the old iron fireplace poker, leaning against the wall. I was 65. My heart was held together by wire and luck, and I was trapped in a basement while a professional looked for a way in. But this was my house, my land, and Sarah Jenkins was about to find out that you should never try to steal a man's past when he has nothing left to lose in his future. The man outside kicked the door, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. The second kick was louder than the first, a heavy, rhythmic thud that made the floorboards above my head groan. In a house this old, sound travels through the frame like a nervous system. I knew that door wouldn't hold. The frame was original 1880s oak, but the deadbolt was a modern addition. I'd installed myself after Clara died, and I knew I hadn't set the strike plate deep enough into the masonry. I didn't panic. Panic is a luxury for people with time, and I had maybe 30 seconds. I looked at the fireplace poker in my hand, a thin piece of iron against a man who looked like he'd been built in a gym for the sole purpose of breaking things. I wasn't going to win a fair fight, but as I'd told Julian, a civil engineer knows exactly where the pressure points are. I dropped the poker and grabbed the heavy topographical map. I didn't head for the stairs. Instead, I moved to the back of the basement, behind the furnace, where an old coal chute had been sealed off with plywood back in the 90s. It was a tight squeeze, even for a man of my frame, but it led directly to the crawl space under the back porch. I heard the front door give way, the sickening splinter of wood, and the jangle of the security chain snapping. The heavy boots hit the floorboards of the kitchen. He was inside. "Sterling!" a voice barked. It wasn't Silas Thorne's smooth baritone. This voice was raspy, the sound of a man who'd spent years shouting over heavy machinery. "I know you're in here, Elias. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Just give me the ledger and we can call it a night." The Sterling ledger. He meant Julian's notebook. They weren't here for me. They were here for the evidence. I scrambled through the chute, the rough plywood scraping my shoulders, and rolled into the damp, dirt-scented darkness of the crawl space. I could hear him moving through the kitchen directly above me. He was tossing drawers, the sound of silverware hitting the floor like rain. He was looking for the files I'd pulled. I stayed perfectly still, my cheek pressed against the cold earth. I realized then that my son and I weren't just dealing with a gold digger. Sarah Jenkins, or Sloan, or whatever her name was tonight, was part of something much larger. She was the scalpel, and the man upstairs was the sledgehammer. After a few minutes of frantic searching, the boots stopped moving. Silence filled the house. Then, I heard the man growl a curse and pull out a phone. "He's not here," the man said. "The car's in the drive, but the bird has flown. No, I haven't found the notebook yet. Listen, Vane told me the old man would be an easy mark. He's 65 and has a heart condition. What do you want me to do?" There was a pause. Then, "Copy that. I'll torch the place. If the files are here, they'll go up with the rafters." My heart skipped a beat, not the flutter of a medical condition, but the cold, sharp shock of a man about to lose everything. The farmhouse wasn't just a building. It was Clara's garden. It was Julian's childhood. It was every memory I had left of a life well lived. I didn't have a weapon, and I couldn't outrun him. But I had the map, and I had the drainage corridor. I crawled to the edge of the porch, where the latticework was loose. I slipped out into the misty rain, staying low in the shadow of the hydrangea bushes. The man was still inside, likely heading to the basement to find the gas line or some old paint thinner. I didn't run for my truck, he'd hear the engine. I ran for the tree line. I knew every inch of these woods. I'd surveyed them myself 40 years ago. About 500 yards past the creek was the entrance to the subsurface drainage corridor, the natural limestone shelf my father had noted on the map. It was a series of interconnected caves and man-made pipes designed to pull water away from the valley. I reached the creek, my lungs burning, the cold dampness of the October air stinging my throat. I looked back and saw a flickering orange light in the kitchen window. He'd started the fire. The sight of those flames licked at my soul. I wanted to scream, to run back and fight him with my bare hands. But I remembered what I told Julian. That's what they want. They want you in a cell or in the ground. I forced myself to turn away. I found the concrete culvert, half hidden by overgrown briars, and slid inside. It was narrow and slick with moss, but it was dry. I pulled out my cell phone, the screen cracked but still glowing, and dialed Julian. "Dad?" His voice was a frantic whisper. "Where are you? I've been trying to call you for 20 minutes. Someone is outside my apartment. I can see them through the peephole. It's not Caleb. It's two men I don't recognize." "Julian, listen to me," I said, my voice shaking. "Get out. Now. Use the service elevator and go to the basement garage. Do not go to your car. Take a cab or an Uber to the Greyhound station. Do not use your credit cards." "Dad, what's happening?" "Is the house. The house is gone, Jules," I said, a sob catching in my throat as I looked back and saw the orange glow reflecting off the trees. "They're burning it down. They're looking for your notebook. They know we have the evidence." There was a long silence on the other end, the kind of silence that happens when a man's world finally finishes collapsing. "I'm at the station," Julian said, his voice suddenly cold, suddenly harder. "I'm getting on a bus to Doylestown. I'll meet you at the old mill by the creek, the one we used to fish at. I'll be there. And Julian, bring the notebook. It's the only thing we have left to trade for our lives." I hung up and sat in the darkness of the culvert, listening to the sound of the fire roaring in the distance. The sterling legacy was being turned to ash, and for a moment, I felt a crushing sense of defeat. I was an old man in a pipe, homeless and hunted. But then, I looked at the map again, illuminated by the faint glow of my phone. I had been so focused on the house that I hadn't looked closely at the Ivy Ridge property details on the back of the topographical sheet. There was a secondary note, written in blue ink by my father in 1978. Easement, 44B. Access to primary valve, strictly controlled by Sterling family. Maintenance hatch located at northeast quadrant of Ridge Manor. Property cannot be gated or restricted as per County Ordinance 12. What happened next changed everything. I realized that the maintenance hatch wasn't just a manhole cover. In the 70s, when the county was worried about the limestone shelf collapsing, they had built a reinforced observation bunker directly under what was now the Ivy Ridge mansion. It was designed to monitor the water levels. And according to this map, the entrance to that bunker was through the very drainage corridor I was sitting in. Sarah Jenkins thought she was hiding in a fortress. She didn't realize she was sitting on top of a tunnel that belonged to me. I began to crawl. The pipe narrowed, then opened into a wider, natural limestone cavern. The air grew colder, smelling of minerals and old, stagnant water. I used the flashlight on my phone, the beam cutting through the dark like a knife. After what felt like miles of crawling and shuffling through the damp dark, I saw it. A rusted iron ladder bolted into the rock wall, leading upward to a heavy steel plate. I climbed. My muscles screamed, and my heart hammered a warning against my ribs, but I didn't stop. I reached the top and pressed my ear against the steel plate. I didn't hear the sound of water or earth. I heard voices. "Not the point, Silas," a woman's voice said. It was her, Sloane. But the Savannah Belle accent was gone. Her voice was sharp, nasal, and dripping with venom. "I told you the old man was a hoarder. If he had a copy of those bridge specs, they're in that house. And if Marcus did his job, they're smoke by now. And the boy? That was Silas Thorne. My men are at the apartment. He hasn't come out. He'll come out. He's a sterling. He's predictable. He'll go to his father, and when he finds a pile of ash, he'll break. That's when we step in with the settlement offer. He signs over the proprietary rights to the bridge tech in exchange for his father not being charged with insurance fraud for the fire. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. They weren't just stealing. They were framing me for the destruction of my own home, to blackmail my son into giving up his life's work. Vane is getting impatient, Thorne said. He needs those specs before the Monday morning board meeting. If we don't have the Delaware bridge data, this whole operation was for nothing. We'll have it, Sarah said. I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. I spent 18 months playing perfect wife to that boring little engineer. I know exactly how he thinks. He's probably sitting on a park bench right now, crying over a wedding photo. He's weak, Silas. Just like his father. I gripped the rungs of the ladder so hard my knuckles turned white. Weak. She thought we were weak because we were kind. She thought we were predictable because we had morals. I looked up at the steel plate. It was a maintenance hatch, and based on the echo of their voices, it was located directly under the floorboards of the Ivy Ridge study. I didn't open it. Not yet. I had no weapon, and there were at least 2 of them, possibly more. I needed Julian, and I needed a way to record what I was hearing. I slowly backed down the ladder, my mind racing. I had to get to the mill. I had to meet my son, but as I reached the bottom of the cavern, my foot hit something that shouldn't have been there, something soft. I shone my light down. It was a leather bag. A designer bag. I recognized it. It was the one Sloane had carried the day she met me. I opened it. Inside wasn't money or jewelry. It was a stack of passports. 6 of them. Each one had her face, but a different name. Sarah Jenkins, Sloane Vance, Emily Thorne, Rebecca Sterling. She hadn't just done this to Julian. She had a graveyard of husbands behind her. And in the bottom of the bag, I found a small, digital voice recorder. I pressed play. Entry 414. Sarah's voice came through the speaker, sounding clinical. The mark is Julian Sterling. Entry point. October 14th. Psychological profile. High integrity. Low conflict. Mother deceased. Father isolated. He is the perfect conduit for the Harrison Vance acquisition. Estimated time to extraction, 18 months. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. She wasn't just a grifter. She was a professional extractor, hired by corporations to dismantle people from the inside out. But there was one more thing in the bag. A small handwritten note on a piece of stationery from a high-end hotel in Savannah. Don't forget the heart medication, Sarah. We need the old man alive until the deed transfer is finalized. If he dies too soon, the probate will lock the property for years. Keep him comfortable. Keep him quiet. It was signed with a single initial, V. Marcus Vane, the CEO of the rival company, the man who had hired her. I realized then that the loans and the foreclosure weren't just about money. They needed my land because of the very thing I was standing in. The drainage corridor was the only way to build the heavy-duty foundation required for the rival bridge project they were planning to pitch using Julian's stolen tech. I didn't know it yet, but Sarah Jenkins had just made the biggest mistake of her career. She had left her playbook in the one place she thought no one would ever look. I tucked the bag under my arm and began the long trek back through the dark toward the mill. What happened next would change the course of our lives forever. Because when I finally reached the old mill, soaking wet and covered in limestone dust, Julian wasn't alone. Standing next to him, bathed in the moonlight, was a woman I hadn't seen in years, a woman who Sarah Jenkins thought was long gone. "Dad," Julian said, his voice trembling, "you're not going to believe who found me at the station." The woman stepped forward. She was older, her face lined with a grief that looked familiar, but her eyes were sharp. "My name is Martha Jenkins," she said. "I'm Sarah's mother, and I'm the only one who knows how to stop her." I looked at the bag in my hand, then at the burning horizon where my house used to be. The escalation was over. The counterattack was about to begin. The old mill smelled of damp stone and a century of forgotten labor. Martha Jenkins sat on a rusted equipment crate, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked like polished bone. She looked nothing like the aristocratic mother Sarah had described in her Savannah fairy tales. This woman was a retired schoolteacher from a hollowed-out town in Ohio, wearing a faded raincoat and a look of such profound shame that I found it hard to look her in the eye. "She's not sick, Elias," Martha said, her voice barely a whisper against the sound of the rain hitting the mill's tin roof. She's not a victim of some unfortunate financial situation or a bad divorce. She's a hunter. She's been doing this since she was 19. She finds men who have something she wants, money, status, or, in your son's case, access, and she grafts herself onto their lives like a parasite. She studies you. She learns what you're missing, and she becomes it. Julian was leaning against a timber beam, the moonlight catching the hollows of his cheeks. He looked like he was listening to a ghost story about himself. "She told me you were dead, Martha," he said, his voice flat. "She said you died in a car accident when she was 12. She even took me to a grave in Savannah," she cried. Martha closed her eyes. That was her grandmother's grave. She just changed the dates in her head when she told you the story. "She didn't kill me, Julian, but she took everything I had. My retirement, my home, my credit. She used my identity to launch her first operation in Atlanta. By the time I realized what was happening, the banks were coming for me, and she was gone. She's not just a grifter, she's a sociopath with a talent for paperwork." I handed the leather bag I'd found in the limestone cavern to Martha. "She left this in a tunnel under Ivy Ridge. There are 6 passports in here, 6 different lives." Martha didn't even need to look inside. She keeps them as trophies. Every time she extracts a mark, she keeps the name. It's a game to her, but she's never stayed this long before. 18 months with Julian, that's a record. She usually bleeds them dry in 6 and vanishes. Why did she stay? "Because of the Delaware Bridge project," I said, the pieces finally clicking together with the sickening precision of a well-oiled machine. She wasn't just after Julian's savings. She was after the proprietary stress load algorithms. Her employer, Marcus Vane, didn't just want to win the contract. He wanted to steal the tech so he could use it on a series of infrastructure projects across the coast. If he has Julian's specs, he doesn't need to hire engineers. He just needs a ghost. The betrayal was becoming visible now, not just as a series of lies, but as a calculated corporate assassination. Every "I love you," every weekend getaway, every conversation about their future had been a data mining session. She had been loading Julian's mind like a hard drive, waiting for the moment the encryption was lowered. But the humiliation was only beginning. The next morning, the sun rose over a world that no longer belonged to us. We were huddled in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Doylestown, the air smelling of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Julian was on his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys in a desperate attempt to lock down his firm's servers. Suddenly, he stopped. His face went gray. "Dad, look at this." He turned the screen toward me. It was a local news site. The headline read, "Local engineer sought for questioning in multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme." Beneath the headline was Julian's professional headshot, the one Sloan had insisted he take for a prestige magazine feature she'd promised to set up. The article stated that anonymous whistleblowers within the firm had provided evidence that Julian Sterling had been diverting project funds into offshore accounts for over a year. It even mentioned the fire at our farmhouse, hinting that I had torched the property to destroy financial records. "She's flipped the narrative," Julian whispered, his hands trembling. "She didn't just take the money. She's making it look like I was the one stealing it, and she was the innocent wife who fled when she discovered the truth." That text she sent me. "Thanks for the signature." She wasn't just talking about the loans. She was talking about the digital footprints she's been leaving in my name for 18 months. I felt a surge of nausea. She was dismantling us in the court of public opinion before we could even get to a legal one. By the time the police sorted through the evidence, our reputations would be ash, and Marcus Vane would have already moved the stolen tech into a secure offshore entity where it could never be recovered. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a FaceTime request from an unknown number. I looked at Julian. He nodded. I swiped the screen. The image that appeared was crisp and bright. It was Sloan No. Sarah. She was sitting in a sun-drenched sunroom, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup. I recognized the wallpaper. It was Ivy Ridge. She looked radiant, refreshed, as if she hadn't just destroyed 2 generations of men. "Hello, Elias," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of any southern lilt. "I see you found the maintenance hatch. I really should have had Silas check those old topographical maps more carefully. But then again, I suppose I can't blame him. Who would have thought a retired bridge builder would be so industrious? You're going to prison, Sarah," I said, my voice vibrating with a cold, focused rage. "I have your bag. I have your mother. I have the recorder." She didn't flinch. She actually laughed a light, melodic sound that chilled me to the bone. "Elias, dear, you have a bag of old paper. My mother? A woman who has been in and out of psychiatric facilities for years? Who do you think the police will believe? The distraught wife who turned in evidence of her husband's corruption, or the bitter old man and his unstable mother-in-law hiding in a motel? She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes narrowing. And as for the recorder, did you really think I'd leave that where you could find it if it actually mattered? That was a decoy entry, Elias. I knew you'd find that bag. I wanted you to feel like you had a win. It keeps you from doing anything truly desperate while Silas finishes the paperwork. What do you want? Julian barked, stepping into the frame. Sarah's expression shifted. For a split second, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't calculated. It was contempt. What I want, Julian, is for you to stop being so pathetic. I gave you 18 months of the best life you'll ever have. I made you interesting. I made you matter, and all you had to do was be the quiet, obedient little builder I needed. But you had to start asking questions. You had to go to your father. She sighed, a theatrical sound. Here is the deal. Silas has the final settlement papers ready. You sign over the rights to the Delaware Bridge algorithms to Vane Construction, and you sign a full confession for the embezzlement. In exchange, I'll ensure the evidence against your father's involvement in the fire disappears. He can keep his pension. He can go buy a small condo somewhere and grow his tomatoes in peace. But you're going to take the fall. 1 year in a minimum security facility, and then you're free to go be a boring nobody again. And if we don't? I asked. Then Marcus Vane makes a phone call, she said, her voice dropping an octave. And the fire at the farmhouse won't be the only tragedy in the Sterling family. I hear the old mill is a very dangerous place this time of year. Lots of structural instability. The screen went black. The silence in the motel room was suffocating. The stakes had been raised beyond anything I had anticipated. This wasn't just about a house or a career anymore. They were threatening our lives. She's right about one thing, Martha Jenkins said, looking at the floor. The police won't help us. Not yet. Vane has the DA in his pocket, and Silas Thorne knows how to bury a case in procedure for decades. Julian stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. I saw his shoulders square, that engineering posture returning. He wasn't bracing for a hit anymore. He was calculating the load. Dad, he said, turning around. How much water can that drainage corridor handle? I blinked, taken aback. What? The subsurface corridor. The limestone shelf. You said it was a natural easement for drainage. If we opened the primary valve at the northeast quadrant, the one on the Ivy Ridge property. What would happen to the mansion's foundation? I felt a spark of understanding ignite in my mind. The mansion is built on a limestone shelf that's already compromised by the subsurface corridor. If the valve is opened and the pressure isn't regulated, the soil becomes liquefied. It's called sinkhole induction. The structure would remain standing, but the ground beneath it would essentially turn to soup. And where is the server room at Ivy Ridge? Julian asked, his eyes burning with a dark intensity. The basement, I whispered. The reinforced observation bunker. If that bunker floods, Julian said, the servers go down. The digital evidence Sarah is using to frame us the stuff that hasn't been uploaded to the cloud yet, it all gets fried. But more importantly, if the ground starts shifting, they'll have to evacuate. They'll have to move the physical files, the original contracts with my forged signatures. They'll move them to Vane's headquarters, I added. A secure facility. No, Julian said, a grim smile finally appearing on his face. They won't have time to get to headquarters. They'll move them to the closest secure location they think they own, the one place they think we can't touch. The farmhouse, I said, the realization hitting me like a bolt of lightning. The remains of the farmhouse. Thorne has a mobile office set up there to oversee the demolition. He told me that when he served the papers. We don't need to go to the police, Julian said, grabbing his jacket. We need to make them come to us. But we need a witness, someone they can't bribe. I looked at Martha. She looked at me. I have a friend, Martha said, her voice regaining its strength. A former student. She's an investigative reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. She's been looking for a way to nail Marcus Vane for years. She just never had an inside source. Well, I said, grabbing the fireplace poker I'd managed to smuggle out of the house. She's about to have 3. What happened next changed everything. We didn't go back to the mill. We didn't go to the police. We went back to the one place Sarah Jenkins thought she had already conquered. I didn't know it yet, But the weak old man was about to show Sarah exactly what happens when you build your house on a foundation of lies, especially when the man who mapped the land is still holding the keys to the floodgates. We arrived at the northeast quadrant of the Ivy Ridge property at 2 a.m. The rain was coming down in sheets now, masking our movements as we crawled through the briars toward the maintenance hatch. But as I reached for the valve, a light flooded the area. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Elias," a voice boomed. I looked up. It wasn't Silas Thorne. It was Marcus Vane himself, flanked by 2 men with rifles, and standing right next to him, holding a folder of documents and a look of cold triumph, was my son's wife. "Did you really think I didn't know about the easement?" Vane asked, stepping into the light. "I'm a developer, Elias. I read the history too, and I've been waiting for you to come and turn that valve for me. You see, I need that sinkhole to happen. It's the only way to claim the insurance on this dump and clear the land for the new bridge access road without a 3-year environmental audit." Sarah stepped forward, her smile as sharp as a razor. "Thanks for the help, Elias. Once you turn that valve, we'll have everything we need." A tragic accident involving a disgruntled former homeowner trying to sabotage a local estate. It's the perfect ending. I looked at the valve, then at my son, who was being held by one of the guards. I realized then that I hadn't just walked into a trap, I had walked into a slaughterhouse. What happened next changed everything, I whispered to myself, my hand hovering over the iron wheel. Because I wasn't the only one who had been planning. "Julian!" I shouted. Now, the sound of my own voice, shouting my son's name into the roar of the rain, felt like the last thing I would ever do. I stood there, my hand trembling on the rusted iron wheel of the valve, staring into the cold, calculated eyes of Marcus Vane. The rifles pointed at us weren't for show. These men were professionals, the kind of shadows that billion-dollar corporations keep on the payroll to make complications disappear into the Pennsylvania mud. Sarah, the woman I had welcomed into my home, the woman my son had loved, stood beside Vane, shielded from the downpour by a heavy black umbrella held by a guard. She looked at me not with hatred but with a terrifying kind of boredom. To her, I wasn't a man. I was a line of code that needed to be deleted. "Julian! Now!" I screamed again. But Julian didn't move. He stood between 2 guards, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped in what looked like total, crushing defeat. The light from Vane's industrial flashlights made the rain look like falling glass. "The boy is broken, Elias," Vane said, his voice a low rumble. "He's an engineer. He knows the math. He knows that in every equation, there's a variable that simply can't be overcome. Tonight, that variable is me. Now, turn the wheel. Give me the sinkhole I need, and maybe I'll let you and your son walk to the edge of the property before we call the police to report your act of terror." I looked at Sarah. "Did you ever love him? Even for a second?" She tilted her head, a small, pitying smile playing on her lips. "Love is a chemical reaction designed to ensure the survival of the species, Elias. It's a flaw in the human operating system. I didn't love Julian, I utilized him. There's a difference. Although, I will say, he was the easiest mark I've ever had. He was so hungry for a family, so desperate to fill the hole your wife left, that he practically handed me the knife and showed me where his heart was." She reached into her pocket and pulled something out. It glinted in the flashlight beam. My breath hitched. It was Clara's wedding ring, the one I'd kept in a velvet box on my dresser, the one I'd intended to give to Julian's first daughter. "I found this in the ashes," Sarah whispered, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. "It didn't melt. Gold is remarkably resilient, unlike your family, Elias." She tossed the ring into the mud at my feet. That was the moment I hit rock bottom. I looked at the ring, half buried in the muck, and I felt the last of my decency die. I had spent my life building things to last: bridges, homes, a family. I believed in the strength of the foundation. But Sarah was right. I had been playing a game of construction, and she was playing a game of demolition. "Turn it," Vane barked, stepping closer, the barrel of his own sidearm now visible. I gripped the wheel. My heart felt like it was going to burst through my ribs. I looked at Julian one last time. He finally raised his head. His eyes weren't full of tears. They were full of numbers. "Dad," Julian said, his voice shockingly steady, "the pressure is at 400 pounds per square inches. The limestone shelf is saturated. If you turn it now, it won't just be a sinkhole." Vane frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm an electrical engineer, Mr. Vane," Julian said, stepping forward, ignoring the rifle pressed into his side. "But my father is a civil engineer. He didn't just map the drainage. He designed the overflow system for the entire county back in '92. And he told me something once about liquefaction. If you introduce high-pressure water into a limestone cavity that's already been hollowed out by illegal basement excavations, like the ones you did to build your server room, you don't get a slow sinkhole. You get a catastrophic structural failure." Julian pulled a small, black device from his pocket, the remote for his car's security system. Or so I thought. He pressed the button. A mile away, at the site of the burned-out farmhouse, a massive explosion rocked the earth. We felt the vibration through the soles of our boots. "What was that?" Vane screamed, spinning around toward the horizon. "That was your mobile office," Julian said, a cold, hard smile finally breaking across his face. "The one Silas Thorne was using to store the original forged documents. I didn't just go to the mill to meet my father, Sarah. I went to the farmhouse. I knew you'd keep the physical evidence close until the deed was transferred. I hacked your security cameras an hour ago. I saw Thorne put the ledger in the safe." "You blew it up?" Sarah gasped, her composure finally cracking. "You idiot! Those were the only documents that could prove the debt." "Exactly," Julian said. "No documents, no debt, no foreclosure. But that was just the distraction. I turned the valve. I turned it with every ounce of strength I had left, the iron screaming as it gave way. The ground beneath Ivy Ridge didn't just shift, it shrieked. A sound like 1,000 bones snapping echoed up through the maintenance hatch. The high-pressure water from the county main, which I had surreptitiously diverted earlier that evening, roared into the limestone caverns below. "The servers," Vane realized, his face turning a sickly shade of white. "The data. Sarah, get to the house." "Too late," Julian said. "I didn't just blow up the office. I uploaded a worm into the Ivy Ridge network the moment I pressed that button. Every file you stole from my firm, every offshore account number Sarah used, every email between you and Silas Thorne, it's all being broadcast right now." "To who?" Sarah hissed, lunging at him. "To the police you claim are in our pocket?" "No," I said, stepping away from the valve as the ground began to ripple like water. "To my sister, Lydia, the former federal prosecutor, and to her friends at the Department of Justice, but more importantly, to the live stream." Martha Jenkins stepped out from behind a heavy oak tree 20 yards away. She wasn't holding a bag. She was holding a professional-grade satellite uplink camera, the kind used by field reporters. "Hello, Sarah," Martha said, her voice amplified by the silence that followed the ground's first groan. "I told you I was a teacher. I never told you I was a technology coordinator for the school district." "I've been recording this entire conversation. The rifles, the threats, the admission that you utilized, Julian. It's all live. There are currently 80,000 people watching you throw my mother's wedding ring into the dirt." The guards hesitated. They were paid to be muscle, not to be the stars of a federal racketeering broadcast. They looked at Vane, then at the sagging roofline of the Ivy Ridge mansion. "This isn't over?" Vane snarled, backing toward his SUV. "I have lawyers, Sterling. I have judges." "You had them," I said, picking up Clara's ring and wiping the mud from the gold. "But judges don't like being humiliated on the nightly news. And your family trust just became a federal evidence locker." The mansion groaned again, a deep, tectonic sound. A massive crack appeared in the front facade, zigzagging through the expensive stonework. The ground around the maintenance hatch began to subside, water bubbling up through the soil in muddy geysers. "Run!" one of the guards shouted, dropping his rifle and bolting for the gate. The other followed suit, disappearing into the darkness. Vane scrambled into his SUV, his tires spinning in the softening earth as he roared away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the rain. She looked at us, her perfect hair plastered to her face, the elite mask completely shattered. She wasn't Sloan Vance anymore. She was just Sarah Jenkins, a small-town thief who had finally run out of room to hide. "You think you won?" she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "You're still homeless, Elias. Your house is a pile of ash. Your son's career is in tatters. You have nothing." "I have my son," I said, walking over to Julian and putting my arm around his shoulders. "And he has his father. We can rebuild a house, Sarah. We can even rebuild a career. But you're going to spend the next 20 years in a cell, and the only thing you'll have to look at is the memory of the night you were outsmarted by a boring engineer." We didn't stay to watch the house fall. We walked back to the truck, Martha leading the way with the camera still rolling. What happened next changed everything. The reversal was complete, but the revenge was just beginning, because as we drove away from the sinking ruins of Ivy Ridge, Julian's phone buzzed. It wasn't a text from a guard or a threat from Vane. It was an alert from the bank Sarah had used to move the stolen funds, the one she thought was untraceable. "Dad," Julian whispered, staring at the screen. The worm didn't just broadcast the files, it triggered the recovery protocol I built into the bridge specs months ago. "I didn't tell you because I didn't know if it would work." "What did it do, Jules?" "It emptied the accounts, Dad. All of them. Vane's personal holdings, the trust money, the payoffs, all of it. It's not in an offshore account. It's been moved into a blind escrow for the victims of the Vane construction fraud cases. And there's one more thing." He turned the phone toward me. "I tracked the last GPS ping from Sarah's personal phone, the one she used to call Silas Thorne. It wasn't from Ivy Ridge. It was from a storage unit in Savannah. The one she told me was full of her family heirlooms." I felt a jolt of adrenaline. "What's in that unit, Julian?" "The bridge specs," he said. "The real ones. She didn't just steal the digital files. She kept the physical blueprints she took from my office, the ones with the original calculations. If we get those back, we can prove the tech was never Vane's to begin with." I looked at Martha. She was staring out the window at the passing trees. "I know that storage facility," she said. "It's not in Savannah. It's in a town called Darien. It's where she keeps the extractions from her previous marks, the lives she stole before she met you." I realized then that our revenge wasn't going to be a quiet legal battle. It was going to be a hunt. We had the evidence, we had the momentum, and we had the woman who knew all of Sarah's secrets. But as we pulled onto the main highway, a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. They were high, bright, and they weren't slowing down. "I didn't know it yet," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel. But Marcus Vane wasn't going to go down without one last act of desperation. The black SUV rammed our bumper, the impact sending us skidding toward the edge of a rain-slicked embankment. "Hold on!" I yelled. The metal-on-metal scream of the collision vibrated through my teeth. Marcus Vane's heavy black SUV hit our rear quarter panel with the precision of a PIT maneuver, a tactic designed to send a vehicle into a terminal spin. I felt the back end of my Silverado kick out, the tires losing their bite on the rain-slicked asphalt of Highway 611. For a heartbeat, we were weightless, the world outside the windshield a blur of gray mist and flashing headlights. But I had spent 40 years calculating the physics of mass and momentum. I didn't slam the brakes. I steered into the skid, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel, feeling the ghost of every bridge I'd ever built steadying my nerves. We slammed into the muddy embankment, the airbags deploying with a deafening thud and the smell of scorched powder. Silence followed, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine and the sound of Martha Jenkins coughing in the back seat. "Julian? Martha?" I croaked, my chest burning from the seatbelt's bite. "I'm okay," Julian gasped, already pushing his door open. He had the leather notebook clutched to his chest like a shield. "Dad, he's coming back." I looked in the rearview mirror. Vane's SUV had skidded to a halt 50 yards down the road. The driver's side door opened, and Marcus Vane stepped out. He wasn't the polished CEO anymore. He was a man who had watched his billion-dollar empire sink into a limestone cavern, and he looked like he was ready to tear the world down with him. He was holding a high-caliber handgun, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of his own high beams. "Elias," Martha said, her voice eerily calm as she reached for the latch of the truck's middle console. "He's not going to stop. He can't. He's too deep in the red now. We need to get to the woods," I said, reaching for my door. "No," Martha said. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the true depth of the secret she had been carrying. "We don't need to run. I told you I brought something from the motel. I told you I had a way to stop her, but it's not for Sarah, it's for him." She reached into the footwell and pulled out a heavy, waterproof document case. She didn't open it. She just looked at Marcus Vane as he began to stride toward us through the rain. "Julian, get the camera," Martha commanded. "Elias, stay behind the engine block. The block will stop a 45. Your ego won't." I did as I was told, pulling Julian down with me as Vane reached the edge of the embankment. He looked like a titan of industry gone feral. "Sterling," Vane roared. "The live stream is down. I have jammers in the SUV. No one is watching now. Give me the boy and the notebook, and I'll make sure your death is ruled an accident." "It's not the notebook you should be worried about, Marcus," Martha shouted, stepping out from behind the truck. She stood tall in the rain, the document case held high. "It's the Augusta Protocol." Vane froze. The name seemed to hit him harder than a physical blow. The gun lowered slightly, his eyes widening in the darkness. "How do you know that name? Who the hell are you?" "I'm the woman who raised the seed you hired," Martha said, her voice echoing off the trees. "I'm the one who taught Sarah how to mimic empathy. I'm the one who wrote the training manuals for the extraction teams you've been using for 10 years. And I'm the one who kept the original contracts, the ones that prove Vane Construction didn't just steal tech. You've been human trafficking extractors into corporate marriages to facilitate hostile takeovers. It's not just fraud, Marcus. It's a federal RICO violation that carries a life sentence." I looked at Julian. He was staring at Martha as if she had just sprouted wings. The retired school teacher story was gone. Martha Jenkins wasn't Sarah's victim. She was her creator, or at least her former handler. "You're Martha Thorne," Vane whispered, the gun hand beginning to shake. "Silas's sister. You were supposed to be dead. He told me you died in the Georgia facility fire. Silas always was a better liar than a brother," Martha spat. "He didn't kill me. He just gave Sarah a reason to hate me, so she'd be a more effective weapon. But Sarah didn't know I kept the archive of stolen lives in that storage unit. She thought she was hiding her trophies. She didn't realize she was protecting the only evidence that could bury you and her uncle for good." The revelation felt like a landslide in my mind. Silas Thorne, the lawyer, was Sarah's uncle. The Vance Family Trust wasn't a fake entity Sarah had made up. It was a front for a multi-generational criminal enterprise that specialized in the surgical destruction of families for corporate profit. Sarah hadn't just found Julian. He had been a target assigned to her by her own family. "I'll kill you all," Vane growled, his face twisting into a mask of pure madness. "I'll burn the storage unit. I'll burn the whole state if I have to." He raised the gun, but before he could pull the trigger, the sound of a high-performance engine tore through the night. A white Range Rover, the same one Sarah had arrived in on that first Sunday, barreled out of the darkness, traveling at 80 miles an hour. It didn't slow down. It didn't swerve. It hit Marcus Vane squarely, the impact sending his body flying like a rag doll into the trees. The Range Rover screeched to a halt, the tires smoking. The door opened, and Sarah Jenkins stepped out. She was covered in mud, her silk blouse torn, but she held herself with a chilling, predatory grace. She didn't look at us. She walked over to the spot where Vane had landed and stood over him for a long beat. Then, she turned toward us. "He was always a liability," Sarah said, her voice flat, the southern accent completely gone. "Too much ego, too much noise. A man like that was never going to survive the collapse." She looked at Martha, her eyes flickering with a complex web of hatred and recognition. "Hello, Mother. I see you've been busy. I should have known you'd be the one to find the Darien unit. You're the only one who knows how I think." "I taught you everything you know, Sarah," Martha said, her voice trembling now. "But I didn't teach you how to be a monster. You chose that part yourself." "I chose to survive," Sarah snapped. "I chose to be the person who holds the knife instead of the one who feels it. And right now, I'm the only one with a working vehicle and a way out of this state." She looked at Julian. For a second, I thought I saw a glimmer of the woman he had loved the way she looked at him when they were happy. But it was a trick of the light. "Julian," she said, her voice softening into a terrifyingly familiar tone. "The archive is useless without the decryption keys. Martha doesn't have them. Silas doesn't have them. I do. Give me the notebook, and I'll take you with me. We can start over. A new name, a new city. We have millions in the Georgia accounts that even your worm couldn't touch. We could be anything." I felt my heart stop. I looked at my son. He was standing in the rain, his world in ruins, his mother's ring in his pocket, and the woman who had dismantled his life was offering him a way out. It was the ultimate temptation. "Julian, don't," I whispered. Julian looked at Sarah. He looked at her for a long time, the silence between them louder than the rain. Then, he did something I didn't expect. He walked toward her. "Julian," I shouted, moving to stop him, but Martha grabbed my arm. "Wait," she hissed. "Look at his hands." Julian stopped 3 feet from Sarah. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather notebook. He held it out to her. "You really think we could start over?" Julian asked, his voice sounding small. "I know we can," Sarah said, her eyes lighting up with the cold fire of a successful negotiation. "I'm the only one who truly understands you, Jules. These old people, they're the past. We're the future." She reached for the notebook, but Julian didn't let go. He gripped her wrist with a strength that made her wince. "You're right about one thing, Sarah," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the hard, cold man I'd seen at the sinkhole. "You are the only one who understands me, which is why you should have known I didn't just build a worm to drain the bank accounts. I built a tracer." Sarah's face went pale. "What? The notebook isn't just paper," Julian said. "The spine is a localized EMP trigger. And since you were kind enough to bring your car, the one with the satellite uplink and the digital ignition within 10 feet of me," Julian pressed a small indentation in the leather binding. A high-pitched hum filled the air for a fraction of a second. Suddenly, the lights on the Range Rover flickered and died. The dashboard went dark. Sarah's phone, tucked into her waistband, began to hiss and smoke. "The car is dead, Sarah," Julian said, shoving the notebook into her chest and stepping back. "And so is your exit strategy. The police are 5 minutes away." Martha's camera didn't just live stream to the news. It was broadcasting a GPS beacon to the state police. "They've been tracking us since we left the mill." Sarah looked at the dead car, then at Julian, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated loathing. She lunged for him, her fingers curved like claws. But she tripped on the muddy embankment, falling to her knees at my son's feet. I walked over and stood next to him. I looked down at the woman who had tried to steal our name, our home, and our souls. "You said we were predictable, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "But that's the thing about a well-built bridge. It doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to hold the weight. You were the stress test we didn't ask for, but we're the ones still standing." In the distance, the first sirens began to wail, a low, mournful sound that grew louder with every second. Blue and red lights began to reflect off the mist, cutting through the darkness like the dawn. Sarah sat in the mud, laughing a dry, rattling sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. "You think this is over? You think one arrest stops the Vance family? You have no idea what's in that storage unit, Elias. If the police find those files, they won't just arrest me. They'll realize half the infrastructure in this country is built on Vane's stolen tech. You'll trigger a national collapse. They'll bury you just to keep the lights on." I looked at Martha. She was staring at the approaching police cars, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "Let them try," Martha said. "I've already sent the primary encryption keys to the Inquirer. By the time the sun comes up, the whole world is going to know that Sterling isn't just a name. It's the truth that brought the House of Vance down." What happened next changed the very fabric of our lives. The arrest was swift. The legal battle that followed was the stuff of legends. But the final twist, the one I never saw coming, didn't happen in a courtroom or a storage unit. It happened 3 weeks later, when I was sitting in the back of my truck, looking at the charred remains of my farmhouse. I was digging through the debris, trying to find anything that might have survived the fire, when my shovel hit something hard near the foundation of the old chimney. It was a small, lead-lined box, one I didn't recognize, one that wasn't on any of Clara's lists. I pried it open, and as I read the letter inside, the world shifted on its axis one last time. I didn't know it yet, but Sarah Jenkins wasn't the only one in this story who had been living a lie. And the secret Clara had kept from me for 40 years was the only thing that could truly save Julian from the darkness Sarah had left behind. I sat on the blackened foundation of what used to be my living room, the lead-lined box heavy in my lap. Around me, the smell of damp ash and charred cedar hung in the morning air like a funeral shroud. The investigators had finished their sweep days ago, and the yellow police tape was starting to sag under the weight of the persistent Pennsylvania drizzle. To anyone passing by, I was just a broken old man sitting in the ruins of a life. They didn't see the box. They didn't see the ghost of Clara standing in the smoke, reaching through time to give me one last piece of the puzzle. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. The paper was crisp, protected by the lead and the velvet lining, and the handwriting was undeniably hers, the elegant, slanted script of the woman who had been my North Star for 40 years. "Elias," the letter began, the date at the top showing it had been written only 3 months before her death. "If you are reading this, then the structural compromise I feared has finally happened. I hope it was just a fire, or a storm. But if a person brought you here, if a shadow found its way into our home, then you need to know the truth about the Sterling name. We are not just builders, Elias. We are keepers." I stopped breathing for a second. The wind kicked up a swirl of gray ash at my feet. "My father didn't just sell that parcel of land to the county in the 70s, the letter continued. He was a brilliant, terrified man who had seen how the world treats those who create things of value. Before he died, he transferred the original Holloway patents, the ones the Delaware project is built on, into a private, blind trust under my maiden name. I never told you because I wanted us to have a normal life. I wanted Julian to grow up believing his talent was his own, not an inheritance. But I saw the world changing. I saw the veins and the thorns of the world circling. I've been paying a quiet retainer to a firm in New York for 30 years to act as a fail-safe. If the Sterling house ever fell, the trust would trigger. Inside the box, beneath the letter, was a heavy brass key and a flash drive. The drive contains the kill switch code for the Holloway patents, Clara wrote. If Marcus Vane, or anyone like him, ever tries to use Julian's work to build their empire, this code will render the digital blueprints useless. It will scramble the stress load algorithms so that no bridge can be built using our tech without our explicit physical authorization. I gave Julian the mind to build. Elias, I'm giving you the power to protect him. Tell our son that trust is a gift, but a foundation is a choice. Build something better this time. I leaned back against the blackened chimney, a sob finally breaking loose from my chest. All this time, I thought I was the one protecting the family. I thought I was the architect. But Clara had seen the cracks in the world long before I did. She had built a fortress around us that was invisible to the naked eye, waiting for the moment we needed it most. What happened next changed the very nature of the war we were fighting. The legal battle didn't take years. It took weeks. When Silas Thorne realized that the Vance family trust was suddenly being sued for patent infringement by a multi-billion-dollar New York legal entity they couldn't intimidate, the house of cards didn't just fall, it imploded. The kill switch was activated 48 hours after I found the box. Every server Marcus Vane had touched, every stolen spec Sarah had tried to sell, turned into a digital labyrinth of gibberish. Vane Construction stock plummeted to zero by noon the next day. Silas Thorne, the untouchable lawyer, was arrested in his office while trying to shred the Augusta Protocol files. Martha's testimony, combined with the encrypted files from the Darien storage unit and the physical blueprints I'd recovered, formed a RICO case so airtight the Department of Justice didn't even offer a plea deal. Sarah Jenkins sat in a windowless room in a federal holding facility, her Sloan Vance persona stripped away until there was nothing left but a cold, hollow girl who had tried to play God with people's hearts. She was sentenced to 30 years without the possibility of parole. Her last words to the court weren't an apology. They were a question. She looked at Julian and asked, "How did you know about the sinkhole?" Julian didn't look at her. He just looked at me and said, "I didn't. My mother did." The recovery was a slow, quiet process. We didn't get the farmhouse back, the fire had been too thorough for that. But we didn't need it. With the Holloway Trust activated, Julian was suddenly one of the wealthiest engineers in the country. He didn't use the money for Ferraris or penthouses. He bought the land back from the county, every acre of the valley, including the ruins of Ivy Ridge. He spent the next year turning that nest of vipers into a public park and a research center for ethical engineering. He designed a new bridge, one that didn't use the stolen tech, but was built on a new principle of transparency and community. He called it the Clara Sterling Memorial Span. As for me, I didn't move into a condo. I built a small, modest cabin on the far edge of our property, right next to the creek where we used to fish. It's made of cedar and stone, and the foundation is deep, deeper than any building I've ever engineered. I was sitting on the porch of that cabin yesterday afternoon, watching the sun dip below the trees. The garden I'd planted was finally starting to take hold, the tomatoes heavy on the vine. I heard the sound of a truck in the driveway, Julian's truck. He's been coming down every weekend. He hopped out of the cab, looking healthy, his shoulders squared, the light back in his eyes. He wasn't carrying a notebook or a legal file. He was carrying a bag of groceries and a new set of lures. "Hey, Dad," he said, walking up the steps. "The river's running clear today. Thought we might head down to the old mill." I smiled, standing up and feeling the familiar pop of my joints. "I'd like that, Jules." We walked down the path in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled because everything that needs to be said has already been proven. We passed the spot where the farmhouse used to stand. Julian had cleared the debris and planted a single, massive oak tree in the center of the old foundation. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Julian asked as we reached the water's edge. "What's that?" "That moment in the hallway," he said, looking at the ripples in the creek. "When Caleb told you she wasn't who we thought she was. I used to think that was the moment my life ended. I used to think I was a failure because I didn't see it coming. I put my hand on his shoulder. And now? Now I think it was the moment my life actually began, he said. The betrayal was just the demolition, Dad. You have to clear the site before you can build the real thing. I'm glad she tried to break us, because now I know exactly what we're made of. I looked at my son, a man who had survived the worst of humanity and come out with his integrity intact. I thought about the lead-lined box and the woman who had loved us enough to prepare for the worst. We're made of sterling, jewels, I said, and that's a foundation that doesn't shift. We spent the rest of the evening fishing until the light was gone. The house was quiet when we went back, but it wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of peace. I realized then that revenge isn't about the fire or the sinkhole. It's not about the prison sentences or the bankruptcies. True revenge is living a life so full, so honest, and so resilient that the people who tried to destroy you become nothing more than a footnote in a much better story. I went to bed that night and dreamed of Clara. She wasn't standing in the smoke. She was standing in the garden, the sun on her face, laughing at a joke I hadn't told yet. She looked at the house we'd built, then at me, and she nodded once. The structure was sound, the weight was holding, and for the first time, in a long, long time, I slept without listening for the sound of a breaking heart.